Hey guys, tonight, we're starting with something tough, huge, and totally harsh. Life in the Roman Empire. Not as a senator, not as an emperor. No golden crown, no marble baths. Tonight, you're not Julius Caesar. You're just you, dropped without any preparation into a world of sandals, sewage, and crucifixions paid for by the government. So, before you get comfortable, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always amazing to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background sound, and let's start tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to the sounds of yelling, chickens, and a baby crying somewhere down the hall. Congratulations, you've just woken up in a Roman insula, the ancient version of an apartment building. Think of it as a multi-story death trap, held together with dust, prayer, and very shaky construction. You're probably living on the 3rd or 4th floor, which is bad news. The higher you live, the poorer you are, and the more likely your ceiling will collapse when someone upstairs spills olive oil. Your room is small, no bigger than a walk-in closet, with stone walls that get damp in the summer and freeze in the winter. There's no window, just a little hole that lets in air, smoke, and the occasional pigeon. The mattress is stuffed with straw and lice. The blanket smells like damp wool and regret. There's no furniture, no decorations, and definitely no kitchen. Cooking inside is not allowed. A small fire could burn down the whole building, and fire safety rules haven't been invented yet. Your only belongings are a clay cup, a worn-out tunic, and maybe a wooden comb if you're lucky. There's no toilet. Not in your room and not in your building. Your chamber pot sits in the corner, silently judging you. You'll have to carry it down narrow, unstable stairs to empty it into the street gutter, hopefully without slipping and adding your own body to the mess. Oh, and the walls are paper thin. You can hear your neighbor praying, coughing, arguing with his wife, and sadly, not arguing with his wife, if you know what I mean. The air is thick with smoke, mold, and the strong smell of unwashed people. Someone is already baking bread downstairs, but you're not invited. The street sellers are yelling out prices for figs and fish guts. In the distance, a centurion is barking orders at someone who is probably already bleeding. You're not even out the door yet, and you're sweating, itchy, and possibly breathing in lead dust from the water pipes. Welcome to the Roman workday. You're not an emperor. You're not a gladiator. You're just another poor person in a crowded building, trying not to fall down the stairs or make a city god angry before noon. And you've still got 23 hours to go. Now that you've survived the climb down the crooked stairs of your insula, it's time to take care of the second most urgent thing this morning, your bladder. There's no bathroom in your apartment, of course. No sink, no toilet, not even a bucket with any dignity. Instead, you walk down the street, holding your chamber pot in one hand and your modesty in the other, heading toward the nearest latrina. This is Rome's public restroom, and calling it public is being nice. It's more like a social club for strangers who don't mind looking at each other while they do their business. You arrive to find a long stone bench with holes cut into it. Under the bench, a shallow stream of water flows, just enough to carry away the waste of the city's poor. You sit if you're brave enough, and hope the person next to you doesn't want to talk. Privacy, not a thing. Doors, absolutely not. People treat it like a town square with extra echo. Businessmen discuss grain prices while squatting. A retired soldier talks about his back pain. Meanwhile, you're just trying not to look directly at the man across from you, who is chewing olives and staring right at you. Then comes the real horror, the tersorium. It's a shared sponge on a stick, kept in a bucket of vinegar or salt water. In theory, you rinse it before you use it. In reality, well, let's just say that sponge has seen some horrible things. You wipe carefully and hope the vinegar worked. If you're lucky, maybe you brought your own cloth. If you're rich, maybe some moss. But you probably just used what everyone else used and now carry the quiet shame of sharing hygiene tools. And if you think you can skip this by going in an alley, think again. There are laws against urinating in public. The fines are real, and Roman guards are not known for gentle warnings. Once you're done, you wash your hands. Wait, no you don't. There's no soap, no running water. Just a quick rinse from a shared basin that's seen more fingers than 100 handshakes. You leave the latrina feeling lighter and a little more dead inside. But hey, that's Rome. And now, it's time for breakfast. If you can even call it that. So, you've done your morning business and managed not to fall into a gutter or get arrested. Impressive. Now it's time for breakfast, the most important meal of the day. Unless you're Roman, in which case, it's just a small snack before work and suffering. Welcome to the Yentaculum, a Roman morning meal that is basically just two things: stale bread and watered-down wine. Sometimes there's cheese, sometimes there's olives, but mostly there's just disappointment. Forget about coffee. The Romans didn't have it. No eggs, no bacon, no pancakes, and certainly no oat milk lattes. Breakfast isn't supposed to be enjoyable. It's just supposed to keep you from dying. Your bread is probably panis rusticus, a rough, chewy piece of grain and dirt, baked yesterday or the day before. It's so dense it could be used as a weapon, and it feels like a rock. The wine is mixed with water, because even they knew that being drunk before sunrise in ancient Rome was a bad idea. Unless you were a senator, there's no kitchen in your apartment. So you eat this meal standing in the street or squatting by a fountain next to other equally unhappy people chewing on bread that tastes like tree bark. If you have a bit of oil or a smear of garum Rome's famous salty fermented fish sauce, then congratulations, you've just added a terrible smell to your already sad meal. If you're wealthy, maybe you get fruit or honey, but you're not. You're a normal Roman citizen, just rich enough to not be a slave, and just poor enough to be jealous of your neighbor's broken jug of goat milk. Sometimes, sellers walk by with hot chickpea snacks or honey cakes, and for a moment, you feel hope. But then you remember your coin pouch is emptier than a gladiator's heart. So you bite your bread and pretend it's cake. And this is how the day starts, with carbs, slight dehydration, and the growing feeling that you're about to walk 7 miles in Roman sandals, with nothing but stale crumbs in your stomach and a small buzz from last night's leftover wine. It doesn't get better, because now it's time to go to work. After your big breakfast of bread and sadness, it's time to face the Roman workday. And let's be clear, unless you're a senator, a poet with a rich sponsor, or one of the lucky few who inherited land from a dead uncle with no other family, you are working. And you're working hard. You might be a laborer, a porter, a potter, a brickmaker, a street cleaner, or if you're really unlucky, a sewer worker. Rome needs a lot of things: roads, aqueducts, temples, baths, and someone has to build them. That someone is you, with your bare hands, under the sun, wearing sandals that give you as much support as a wet leaf. The Roman workday starts early, very early. The sun is barely up, but the foreman is already yelling in Latin and waving a stick. If you're late, you lose a day's pay, or worse, you get beaten, shamed, or fired. In Rome, that means you starve. With honor, your tools are simple. You dig with a shovel made of splinters and hope. You carry bricks on your back and haul water from a tank that smells like old socks and broken dreams. There are no gloves, no helmets, just sweat, dust, and the constant fear that one wrong move could crush your back and your career at the same time. And if you're a craftsman, good luck. You're competing with hundreds of others selling the same clay pots, sandals, or cheap tunics. Selling for a lower price is common, and quality doesn't matter if a richer citizen decides he doesn't like your face. Even better jobs, like a messenger, accountant, or teacher, aren't fancy. You're either running through Rome's chaotic streets with scrolls under your arm, writing numbers for someone who will forget your name, or trying to teach Latin to a group of senators' children who already think they're gods. Women, they're working too, spinning, weaving, selling vegetables, or running stalls in the markets. Plus, raising children, managing the house, and trying not to die during childbirth. They were multitasking before it was a word. And after all this, you get a short break for lunch, maybe, if your supervisor isn't in a bad mood or trying to impress a visiting official. So yes, you work, or you die trying. Rome may last forever, but your back won't. So, you've made it through the morning without passing out or being whipped. Now it's time to walk through the ancient Roman street, a crowded, chaotic mess designed by someone who clearly hated personal space and public health. Picture it. The sun is high, the city is buzzing, and the street is alive. Not in a nice, poetic way, but in a literal way. Rats, flies, stray dogs, farm animals, beggars, merchants yelling in 6 languages, children running wild, and thieves pretending to help old ladies while stealing your coin purse. It's like Times Square, if Times Square had no toilets and everyone was carrying a goat. Let's talk about the roads. Roman roads were engineering wonders, perfectly straight, well paved, and usually covered in a mix of urine, spilled wine, vomit, animal waste, and leftover fish sauce. The middle of the street is an open sewer. If you step off the raised sidewalk without looking, congratulations, you've just dipped your sandal in a puddle of human filth. Wagons rush by with no speed limits, no crosswalks, and no mercy. They don't stop for people. In fact, Roman law banned heavy carts during the day in the city, which means drivers race through at night, in the dark, without brakes, like they're in a chariot race. If you're not crushed by wheels, you'll be pushed by elbows, baskets, or an angry fish seller shouting about his rotten eels. Then there's the air, thick with smoke from cooking fires, incense from temples, and the smell of public toilets floating on the breeze. Oh, and dead animals. Sometimes people just leave them there. If a dog dies in the public square, someone might just throw a cloth over it and walk away. And don't forget the public shows, random fights, sudden protests, or a politician's parade that blocks traffic for hours while trumpets play loudly and out of tune in your face. So yes, the Roman street is alive and trying to get you. Slip on a fig, get hit by a runaway cart, or accidentally annoy a rich person's pet monkey, and your day could end faster than Caesar's. And you were just trying to go buy some lentils? You're sweaty, dusty, and you desperately want a splash of something cold. The good news is, you live in Rome, a city famous for its aqueducts. These amazing engineering feats carry fresh water from the hills right into the heart of the empire. The bad news is that water doesn't care about you. Unless you're rich enough to live in a house with your own private fountain, you're sharing water with thousands of your closest neighbors, who are all coughing, sneezing, and not washing their hands. Your options are the public fountains, where everyone fills their jars, washes their feet, and sometimes dunks a child for fun or to get clean. And by clean, we mean a wet version of hope. If you want to wash up, your best choice is the thermae, the Roman public baths. They're everywhere, and everyone uses them. Sounds nice, right? But here's the catch. The water flows through multiple pools with no soap, no chlorine, and very little shame. You'll be sitting in a warm bath with a dozen other men, none of whom care about being modest. Conversations are loud, political, and sometimes happen while everyone is naked. A man might try to sell you socks, while another cleans his ears with a stick and the water. It's been used by everyone. If you were hoping to feel clean, think again. You're soaking in bacteria with a hint of eucalyptus. Also, a fun fact, the plumbing system often used lead pipes. Yes, lead. The Romans were great at engineering, but not so great at chemistry. Over time, that convenient indoor plumbing could cause all sorts of fun problems, like anemia, gout, infertility, and if you're really lucky, want to drink something safer? Wine? Seriously, water is seen as suspicious, especially in the poorer areas, where it's often dirty from toilets and street runoff. So, wine is mixed with water and drunk all day by men, women, and children. Because, what better way to survive a falling empire than with a gentle buzz? So yes, Rome brought water into the city before most of the world knew what a pipe was. But for the average person, it's a risk every time you drink, bathe, or wash your toes. Enjoy your aqueducts, just don't trust them. Welcome to the Roman Empire, where pain isn't just possible, it's the background music of your entire life. You stub your toe, no ice, no painkillers. You grit your teeth and keep going until it either heals incorrectly or falls off. You break a bone. You wrap it in a dirty rag and try not to breathe too hard. You get a splinter. Good luck. That's how infections start, and that's how you might die. Roman society isn't big on comfort. There are no tools designed to be easy to use, no padded seats, and no idea of taking it easy. If you're a laborer, you're lifting bricks with a hernia and a prayer. If you're a soldier, you're marching 20 miles a day with bleeding feet and a scorpion bite on your leg. If you're a woman giving birth, well, welcome to agony. Your midwife might know a special chant, but that's about it. Every part of your body is one wrong step away from becoming an open wound or a warning story for others. And unless you live near a temple with a very dedicated priest, your best option is homemade creams, herbal smoke, or just ignoring the problem until it either goes away or you end up in a grave. There's no such thing as anesthesia. Surgeries are done while you scream into a block of wood. A dislocated shoulder is popped back in by a man named Marcus, who learned by watching someone else fail at it. Dental work. Picture a blacksmith, then picture your mouth. That's the scene. And if you're a slave or poor, people don't even pretend to care. You could be bleeding out on the side of the road, and the best you'll get is, don't stain the mosaic. Even upper-class Romans saw pain as a sign of virtue. Stoicism was the popular philosophy. Enduring suffering without complaining was seen as noble. If you cried over a broken arm, you weren't just in pain, you were weak. Real Romans suffer silently, then write poetry about it later. So yes, pain is always there, and it usually comes without warning, without a cure, and definitely without sympathy. On that happy note, let's look at what happens when you actually go see a Roman doctor. So, you've hurt yourself. Maybe it was the infected blister from yesterday's work. Or maybe you tried to shave with a bronze blade, and now your chin looks like a gladiator training ground. Either way, it's time to get medical help, which in ancient Rome is less about healing and more about surviving the treatment. Let's start with the basics. Roman medicine is a messy mix of Greek theories, mystical guesses, and a surprising amount of leaves. The main belief is that the body is controlled by 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Feeling sick? One of them is out of balance. The solution: drain something. So your doctor, who might also be your barber, immediately reaches for the leeches or a knife. Bloodletting is the go-to treatment for everything, from headaches to moral problems. Have a cough, let's open a vein. Feeling depressed, we'll just drain some sadness out of your arm. Surgery. Oh yes, it exists. Roman surgeons had scalpels, forceps, and even bone drills. What they didn't have were anesthetics. You stay awake through the whole thing, gripping the edge of a wooden table while a man in a dirty toga cuts into your body with the confidence of someone who once saw a drawing of it. Antiseptics, not really a thing. They might wash wounds with wine or vinegar, which does help, but also burns like a punishment from the gods. Infection is a common side effect. So is death. Prescriptions are all over the place. You might be given honey, garlic, crushed beetles, or a paste made of herbs, ash, and very specific types of animal poop. If things get worse, you're told to sleep in a temple, pray to Asclepius, and hope that divine dreams will cure you. And if none of it works, well, your doctor shrugs, your family lights a candle, and your neighbors start whispering about what your death might mean. It's not that. Romans didn't care about health. They just hadn't quite figured out what helped and what killed you more quickly. So next time you sneeze, be grateful for modern antibiotics and that you don't live in a world where healing often starts with losing blood. After a long day of sweating, bleeding, and dodging carts, you're starving. It's time for dinner. Or as the Romans called it, cena. Just don't expect anything remotely comforting. Let's start with what's not on the table. No pizza, no pasta, no tomatoes, no potatoes, no chocolate, no sugar, and absolutely no coffee. None of those things had been discovered or brought to Rome yet. This isn't Italian food. This is pre-eatable survival. You sit down to a wooden bowl of something brown and sort of hot. It's probably pulse, a porridge made of spelt beans or lentils. It tastes like wet gravel with a hint of herbs, if you're lucky. If you're not lucky, it tastes like wet gravel without the herbs. Protein is rare, unless you caught it, trapped it, or fished for it yourself. Meat is expensive, and even when you get some, it's often not fresh. Roman cooking didn't use refrigeration, so they preserved food by heavily salting it, smoking it, or soaking it in garum, a fermented fish sauce that smells like the dead ocean and burns your soul just thinking about it. If you're feeling fancy, there might be boiled vegetables, hard cheese, or the occasional fig. Rich Romans ate exotic dishes like roasted flamingo, stuffed dormice, or jellyfish in vinegar. Foods that mostly scream, "Look at how rich I am and how little I care about taste." Your wine is always mixed with water. Drinking it straight is seen as something barbarians do. But don't worry, the water it's mixed with is probably dirty too, so you're just choosing how fast you want to get sick. Dessert, maybe dried fruit, maybe nuts. Or maybe you're not eating because it's a feast day for a god who doesn't like overeating. Either way, you're not ending the night with a tiramisu. There are no napkins. You wipe your hands on a cloth shared with 10 other people, or you just use your tunic and pretend it's clean. By the end of the meal, your stomach is full but uncomfortable, and your breath smells like garlic, wine, and a little bit of despair. But at least you're fed. Now all you have to do is survive the Roman nightlife. And trust me, that's not a relaxing walk. After a long day of dirt, hard work, and fish sauce, you might be hoping for a little fun, something to take your mind off your crumbling apartment and the open sewer outside. Well, good news, you're in Rome, where entertainment is everywhere. Bad news, most of it is horrifying. Let's start with the main event, the Colosseum. It's the crown jewel of Roman engineering, and the place where your soul quietly dies. This is where crowds gather to watch men stab each other for sport. Wild animals eat criminals, and sometimes, if the emperor is feeling dramatic, they recreate full naval battles with real water and real drowning. It's free to get in, which sounds nice until you realize it's free because the government wants you distracted while the Picus Senate raises taxes and quietly takes over Armenia. You sit packed between sweaty strangers, cheering as a gladiator loses an arm or a leg. There's blood, sand, and sometimes public executions with extra drama. You're clapping, but you're not sure why. Feeling a little sensitive, prefer the theater. Head to the amphitheater for a Roman play. Maybe a tragedy written in Latin that you can barely understand. Or a comedy where the punchline involves someone pretending to disrespect Jupiter with a sausage. The Romans were not known for being subtle. If you're feeling sporty, try the Circus Maximus. Chariot races are fast, exciting, and often deadly. There are no guardrails, no helmets, and lots of shouting. Crashes are common and spectacular, and the crowd loves it. They're here for the violence and the betting. Don't cheer for the wrong team unless you're ready to fight your way home. And then there's the street entertainment, fire breathers, acrobats, musicians, con artists, and the occasional philosophical speech from a barefoot man with nothing to lose. If you don't like the show, wait 5 minutes. Something else, or someone else, will start yelling. But behind all of it, there's a strange, brilliant madness. Rome didn't just distract its people. It amazed them into forgetting how brutal daily life was. It used spectacle as a weapon. And if that doesn't numb you enough, there's always more. Wine. Now, let's take a walk through justice, Roman style. Spoiler, it's not comforting. You've survived work, dinner, and a gladiator getting stabbed for applause. You might think you're safe now, that as long as you keep your head down, the law will protect you. Oh, that's cute. In Rome, the law doesn't protect you. It reminds you. It reminds you that you're small, replaceable, and that mercy is a luxury, saved for statues of emperors. First of all, your legal status matters. If you're a citizen, you have rights. In theory, you can't be whipped in public unless someone important gets really annoyed and you get a proper trial. If you're a non-citizen, justice comes in the form of a fist, a branding iron, or a quick execution outside the city gates. Slaves, they are property. If a slave murders their master, even if the master deserved it, every slave in the house might be executed just to send a message. That message is, don't even think about it. If you're accused of a crime, don't expect a calm chat with a lawyer. Trials are public shows. The wealthier person brings witnesses, bribes, and dramatic performances. You bring your tunic and a sinking feeling. If you cry at the right moment, that might help. If you have no powerful friends, pray to Jupiter and hope the judge isn't hungover. Punishments are designed not just to hurt, but to scare others. Thieves can be branded or have their hands broken. Liars might get their tongue pierced. Fraud, public whipping, or being sent away, if you're lucky. And if you insult the emperor, it's not jail time, it's death, usually in a creative way. Some crimes require public punishment, ideally in front of a crowd that cheers louder than they did. For the morning's beheading, crucifixion is popular. It's long, slow, and humiliating. It wasn't just for Jesus. It was the go-to punishment for rebels, robbers, and anyone the state wanted to make an example of. And remember, law enforcement isn't there to help. The vigils are Rome's version of firefighters and police, underpaid, overworked, and often corrupt. If you're mugged, they might shrug. If you bribe them, they might help you mug someone else. So yes, Rome has laws, written in stone and read in public squares, but they serve power, not justice. Now let's talk about gods, because you're not just obeying men here, you're on Jupiter's territory. After surviving the streets and avoiding Roman justice, you may hope to find comfort in religion. A little peace, a little personal spirituality. Nope, not here. In the Roman Empire, religion isn't a private thing. It's a public duty, a constant cloud of incense and responsibility wrapped around every moment of your life. You don't choose your gods, they choose you. And there are so many of them. There's a god for everything. Door hinges, cardia, sewers, closina, boundaries, terminus, and even mildew, robigus. You can't walk 5 steps without passing a shrine. If you don't stop to bow, light a candle, or say a prayer, you're not just being rude, you're asking for disaster. Maybe not today, but eventually. And when your roof collapses, everyone will nod and say, "Ah yes, he skipped the Saturnalia offering." Religious festivals fill the calendar, dozens, every year. On those days, business stops, animals are sacrificed, and the air smells like roasting bull and wet marble. You go because you're supposed to, but also because you're afraid. If the gods aren't honored properly, they'll strike back with plagues, droughts, or a really bad harvest that ruins everyone's lentil supply. Now, let's talk about emperor worship. The government wants you to worship the emperor, not just as a ruler, but as a living god. You're expected to offer incense at his altar, sing his praises, and never, ever roll your eyes during a victory parade. That's almost treason. If you're caught not participating in public worship, say you're a little too quiet during a festival, or you don't show up to throw grain into the temple flame, you could be labeled as impious, an atheist, or worst of all, suspicious. Being suspicious in Rome is like having blood on you in shark-infested waters. And if you're part of a foreign cult, you'd better keep that quiet, unless it's officially approved. The state doesn't like new gods unless they bring wine, taxes, or new soldiers. Roman religion isn't about belief, it's about ritual. You don't have to feel it, you just have to do it correctly, on time, and in public. And you better smile while you sacrifice that goat. Speaking of social performance, let's climb the greasy pole of Roman ambition in the next chapter. You've bowed to the gods, avoided a lawsuit, and survived a public bath without catching something mythical. But here comes the most tiring part of Roman life, the social hierarchy. It's a brutal, perfectly arranged machine where every word, gesture, and even the straps on your sandals could make or break you. Roman society is a ladder, but it's covered in oil and lined with daggers. At the top are the senators, the old money families with purple stripes on their togas, and so much land it has its own zip code. Below them are the equestrians, the wealthy business class. Then come the plebeians, like you, the struggling middle and lower classes. Below that are freedmen, slaves, foreigners, and the guy who accidentally insulted a statue of Augustus once. Want to move up? You'll need patrons, powerful people who protect you in exchange for lifelong loyalty, running errands, favors, and the occasional vote. It's like having a boss, a godfather, and a landlord, all in one charming, condescending person. Each morning, you visit your patron's home as part of the ceremony. You wait in line with other clients, praise his haircut, maybe compliment his son's toga, and then beg for a favor, usually money, food, or a recommendation. If you're lucky, he throws you a coin and lets you carry his chair through the public square. Congratulations, you're now connected. Every move you make is watched and judged. Your clothes must be clean, not stylish, just clean. Your speech must be proper. Your friends must be carefully chosen. And whatever you do, don't show ambition. that makes people nervous. If you rise too quickly, others will plot to knock you back down, socially or literally. Networking is warfare. Gossip is a form of money. The wrong comment at a dinner party can end your career. The right marriage can save your entire family, but you better play it carefully. Love is for poets. The rest of Rome marries for alliances and property. And even if you climb high, don't get too comfortable. One bad harvest, one missed ritual, one jealous rival, and it's all over. You won't even hear the dagger coming. Now the sun is setting. Surely things calm down at night, right? Not in Rome. The sun dips below the rooftops of Rome, and for a brief moment you think, maybe now, finally, I can rest. But night in the Roman Empire isn't a time for peace. The mood just changes from noisy and chaotic to dark and deadly. First, let's talk about light. There isn't any, unless you're rich enough to burn oil lamps all night, and very few are. Most people rely on moonlight, memory, and blind hope to find their way through the maze-like alleys of the city. If you trip and fall, no one is helping you. The vigils, Rome's official night watchmen, are supposed to patrol the streets, prevent fires, and stop crimes. In reality, they're overworked, underpaid, and often more interested in napping than in being heroes. Some are brave, most can be bribed, and all of them are outnumbered. Criminals know this. If you're walking home alone, you are the easy target. It doesn't matter who you are. Unless you're armed, fast, or invisible, you're at risk. And then there's fire, Rome's greatest nighttime terror. Cooking after dark is illegal for this exact reason, but laws mean little to a hungry person. A single overturned lamp can turn an entire block into ash in hours. The Great Fire of 64 CE didn't start itself, but once it did, it raged like the god of war in a bad mood. You might think your building is safe until you smell smoke at midnight and realize there's no organized escape plan. You grab your one tunic, your chamber pot, and maybe your dignity, and you run for your life down a collapsing staircase. And if it's not fire or thieves, it's noise. Drunken parties echo through the streets. Processions for minor gods parade by with drums and shouting. Silence is a myth, and safety, that's reserved for the wealthy, the armed, and the extraordinarily lucky. But hey, morning is almost here. A breeze, a quiet meal, maybe even sleep. Think again. Rome doesn't go silent at night. It just shifts into something darker, louder, and more dangerous. The city never truly sleeps. It prowls. Let's start with fire. There's no real fire department, just the vigils, who are part firefighter, part night watch, and part deeply underpaid janitor. They carry buckets and hope. If your apartment catches fire, you might be rescued, or you might become a warning story in tomorrow's gossip. Then there are the thieves, cut purses, and pickpockets, who treat the moonlight like a hunter's friend. Rome's alleys are narrow and unlit. Torches are expensive. If you must walk after dark, you do so by feel, by instinct, and hopefully not by yourself. Don't carry anything shiny, don't make eye contact, and whatever you do, don't get caught. Between two drunken gladiators arguing about a missing sandal. Speaking of drunk, the city's nightlife is booming. Taverns are overflowing with cheap wine, loud music, and men shouting bad poetry about Mars and women they'll never impress. Fights break out, dice games end in blood, and sometimes an angry noble decides to settle a disagreement by having a slave beat someone in the street. You hide in the shadows and pretend you didn't see anything. If you're a woman walking alone, good luck. Rome is not kind to women without a male escort. Your insula creaks like it's thinking about collapsing. Rats scurry through the walls. Your neighbor coughs like a dying goat. Somewhere nearby, someone is screaming, either from passion, murder, or both. You press your face into a sweaty pillow and pray to Mercury for silence. But there is no silence in Rome, not for you. Because in the Roman Empire, even the darkness is loud. And when dawn comes, you'll have to do it all again. You woke up in a crumbling insula, survived public toilets, chariot traffic, gladiator gore, lead poisoning, leeches, religious festivals, burning rooftops, and half-cooked lentils soaked in fermented fish sauce, and slept through riots, rats, and the occasional public beheading. You're dirty, tired, possibly infected, and emotionally scarred by the shared sponge. And it's only been one day. Would you last another? Honestly, no, you wouldn't. You'd give up before the second serving of garum. And yet, the Romans did it for centuries. Because here's the crazy, magnificent thing. In the middle of all this filth, brutality, and noise, Rome worked. Somehow they built cities, roads, aqueducts, libraries, temples, and amphitheaters. They expanded their empire across continents, shaped Europe and beyond for 2,000 years. Latin became the root of half the languages you hear today. Their architecture inspired cathedrals, parliaments, and college campuses. Their political ideas republics, senates, veto, power still echo through modern democracies. But it came at a price. And yet they endured, they adapted. They didn't have a choice, because Rome wasn't made of gold. It was made of sweat, fear, ambition, and survival. You'd trade your entire bag of coins for a hot shower and a chair with a back. And that's okay. You don't need to survive ancient Rome. You just need to understand it. And maybe, just maybe, appreciate that someone, somewhere, once walked those same filthy streets and helped build the empire so you could sit here today, clean, safe, and a little horrified. Imagine being a Parthian princess in the 2nd century. Rhodogun wasn't born into a life of peace and pearls. She was born into a world of grit, horses, and the constant possibility that someone might poison your dates. Her father, Mithridates I, was no lazy king. He was the one who grew Parthia from a dusty little kingdom into a powerful empire that would one day fight with Rome. But growing an empire comes with problems, namely rebellions, betrayals, and neighbors who just won't accept that your army now owns their land. She wasn't just trained in wearing silk and being polite. She learned about government, how to command respect, and how to wear armor that didn't clash with her earrings. It's important to understand the role of Parthian women here. While they weren't always in the spotlight, Parthian noble women were no strangers to power. Some ruled cities, others planned family alliances, and a few, like Rhodogun, became legends, not for who they married, but for who they defeated. And defeat them she did, but that part comes later. At this point in her life, Rhodogun's name was already known. She was a symbol, not just of her royal family, but of Parthian pride. Everyone expected her to either marry a king or become like one herself. She didn't seem happy just sitting on the sidelines while cities burned or provinces rebelled. And as fate would have it, she would one day make a vow that involved not washing her hair until a rebellion was crushed. Spoiler alert, it took a while. But before we get to that dusty crown moment, we need to understand what kind of rebellion would dare to annoy a princess who would rather lead troops than wear gold. The Parthian Empire, as grand as it looked on a map, was more like it was held together with duct tape than built from marble. It stretched from the Persian Gulf to the edges of Mesopotamia and beyond, stitched together by marriages, promises, and the occasional sword pressed firmly against someone's neck. So when a rebellion started in the western provinces, likely in Media or Babylonia, it wasn't a huge surprise. What was surprising was how bold the rebels were. These weren't just angry taxpayers. These were powerful nobles and city leaders, angry at the central government, and maybe feeling brave because a male royal leader was young or absent. They didn't just complain. They took over forts, silenced Parthian messengers, and basically told the crown to go polish its own sandals. Now, in normal times, the king would have sent a general or a cousin with too much ambition and not enough brains. But these weren't normal times. For reasons historians still debate. The timing, maybe it was logistics, or maybe it was just pure royal defiance. Rhodagun herself took command, and not just in an abstract, I'll approve the battle plans kind of way. No, she got on a horse, put on armor, and made a public promise that would become the stuff of legend. She would not wash, comb, or do anything to her hair until the rebellion was crushed. It was bold, it was dramatic, and it was frankly a nightmare for the court hairdressers. But that promise, as dramatic as it sounds, wasn't about vanity. It was a statement, a visual symbol that connected her personal dignity to the fate of the empire. Every time someone saw her tangled, dusty hair, they would be reminded, this isn't over until we win. And that worked. Soldiers were inspired. The troops didn't just see a princess. They saw a commander who was literally letting her beauty fade with the war. She represented Parthian strength, the kind that didn't rely on thrones, but on thorns, dust, and sweat. Meanwhile, the rebels probably didn't know whether to laugh or panic. They had expected a general, maybe a diplomat. Instead, they got a furious, unwashed woman who was riding straight for their gates with steel in her eyes and no time for conditioner. And worse, she meant business. When Rhodagun set out from the capital, she wasn't followed by a fancy court parade or showered in rose petals. She was accompanied by cavalry, grit, and the weight of an empire that needed its rebels crushed like an overripe fig, and she looked the part. Gone were any signs of courtly elegance. Her hair, famously uncombed, began to take on a life of its own, hanging like a banner of war-torn determination. In a world obsessed with appearances, she turned her own into a weapon. The campaign was not quick. This wasn't a single battle that could be easily won with a bribe and a battering ram. The rebel cities were well defended and confident. Her military instincts were sharp, perhaps sharper than many of the men who had lead before her. Her forces would appear at the edge of a rebel-held city, vanish like smoke, and return a day later from an unexpected direction. Reports suggest her soldiers admired her, not just as a symbol, but as a tactician. She didn't ride behind the lines. She was up front, with dirt under her nails and fury under her helmet. And as the weeks dragged on, so did her hair. It is said that by the third month, the strands had begun to knot into ropes, full of dust and sweat and the whispers of battlefield prayers. But that only made her more terrifying to her enemies and more respected by her men. The rebels called her the Witch Queen, not because she practiced magic, but because no noblewoman should still be fighting in the field and refusing a bath. Surely, they thought, something unnatural was at work. But there was nothing magical about it, just pure, relentless discipline. By the time her army surrounded the final rebel stronghold, the legend had grown faster than the rebellion had. In taverns and tents, soldiers joked that the enemy wasn't afraid of Parthian swords. They were afraid Rhodagun would never wash again. And to be honest, they weren't entirely wrong. The last stronghold of the rebellion loomed ahead, a walled city, said to be impossible to breach, where the rebel leaders had dug in like ticks on a dog. Supplies had been stored, Archers lined the walls, and the gates had been strengthened with the kind of arrogant confidence only traitors have. They believed they could outlast Rhodogun. Big mistake. By now, her appearance was legendary. Word had spread not just through the empire, but into enemy territory. The woman who won't wash, they whispered, has arrived. Some said her hair had turned to iron. Others claimed she hadn't slept in weeks. The myths piled up like siege ladders. But Rhodogun was no myth. She was real, and she had a plan. Instead of launching a reckless attack, she chose a slow, punishing siege. She cut off their trade routes, intercepted their messengers, and poisoned their wells. The rebels had prepared for a battle of swords. Instead, they got starvation. She used time itself as a weapon, letting her enemies rot from the inside out, and all the while, she camped outside the city with her soldiers, just another commander under the canvas tents. She shared their meals, gritty bread and lukewarm wine. She inspected their armor. She led patrols, and she still, despite every opportunity, refused to so much as touch a comb. For her soldiers, the vow had become sacred. No one dared suggest she break it, even as a joke. It had become a living symbol of Parthian pride, a symbol that their suffering was not for nothing. Every tangled strand was a reminder. We are still in this fight. Inside the rebel city, spirits crumbled. They had expected to break the enemy's will by holding out. Instead, it was they who began to weaken. Their own commanders started to argue. Food ran low. Rumors of desertion began to spread like cracks through stone. And then came the breaking point. A small gate, left unguarded for just an hour, perhaps out of tiredness, perhaps sabotaged, was found by one of Rhodogun's scouts. That night, under the cover of darkness and wind, her forces slipped in and opened the main gates from the inside. By morning, the city was hers, and Rhodogun, her face streaked with sweat and ash, stood on top of the walls, unbathed, victorious, and utterly terrifying. Victory was not declared with trumpets or parades. It was declared with water. After months of dust, battle, and relentless pursuit, Rhodogun stood before her army, not in royal robes, but in the same battlefield clothes she had worn since the campaign began. Her armor had dents from rebel blades, her face was lined from the sun and stress, and her hair, her wild, matted, filthy hair, now hung down her back like a lion's mane made of wire and legend. But she had done it. Every rebel city had fallen. Every oathbreaker had been defeated. And now, with her vow complete, she could finally do what no one in the empire had dared to try to rush. She could wash her hair, according to tradition and later stories passed down through word of mouth. Rhodogun called for her servants, not to a golden chamber, but to a public courtyard. She wanted her soldiers, the ones who bled beside her, to witness this moment. Basins were filled, oils were warmed, and combs were brought out from storage like sacred objects. And then, under the open sky, the warrior princess of Parthia, caked in the grime of war, began to scrub away months of rebellion. It was symbolic. Every tangle undone was another city reclaimed. Every rinse of water over her head washed away defiance, soaking into the earth as if the land itself was being restored. Some say she cried, others say she laughed. But what no one argued about was the silence among the troops as they watched. Hardened men, scarred and sunburned, stood like statues as Rhodogun emerged from her ritual, transformed. No crown was placed on her head. She didn't need one. The dust had become her crown. The act of not washing had become more powerful than any jewel. And in that moment, Parthia didn't just have a princess. It had a symbol. She could have returned to court in triumph, let the writers compose flattering poems, and allowed nobles to fall over themselves to praise her. But she didn't rush back to luxury. She stayed with her troops a while longer. She ate with them. She listened to them. She knew that her legend had just begun, but she didn't want it made of gold. She wanted it made of memory after the hair-washing. That became an event for the ages. Rhodagun could have ridden straight to the capital with parades, banners, and enough propaganda to last a century. But she didn't. Instead, she took the long route back, deliberately visiting the cities she had reclaimed one by one, walking their streets, inspecting their defenses, and making sure no sparks of rebellion still glowed under the ashes. This wasn't just a ceremony, it was a strategy. They fall from forgetting why they fought in the first place. She wanted the rebels and loyalists alike to understand that Parthian strength wasn't just cavalry and coin. It was represented in her very presence, a woman who chose hardship over comfort and earned loyalty by example, not by decree. And loyalty she received. Everywhere she went, people gathered, not to stare at royalty, but to look in awe at her, not polished, not perfumed, but real. She didn't bring fear, she brought accountability. She asked for reports, heard complaints, and paid for supplies out of her own war funds. She rewarded cities that had stayed loyal and offered mercy, carefully and cautiously, to those who were sorry. By the time she reached the royal court, her return had already become a legend. Writers rushed to record her story. Artists argued over how to capture her, wild-haired and battle-worn, or radiant and reborn. Ministers whispered about what it all meant, a woman commanding armies, keeping promises, and now standing at the heart of Parthian power, with the loyalty of half the provinces in her hand. And here was the problem. What do you do with a princess who is more popular than most kings? Some urged that she'd be married off, as if that would control her influence. Others wanted her placed in charge of border defenses permanently. But Rhodagun didn't seem concerned with titles or politics. She had proven what she needed to. The battlefield had been her throne, the dust her crown, and her name, already etched in the hearts of soldiers and citizens, needed no royal stamp to last. She didn't need a coronation. She had already been crowned, not with gold, but with history. In the months after her campaign, Rhodagun didn't seek the spotlight, but it followed her anyway. She became the subject of poetry, sculpture, gossip, and awe, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. Every soldier who had fought under her command returned with a story, and every story made her larger, more lasting, more untouchable. Yet in the palace halls of Parthia, where politics moved like snakes behind silk curtains, her silence was unsettling. She didn't boast, she didn't lobby, she didn't ask for titles or lands. Instead, she observed, listened, and understood that the real battlefield had only shifted from stone walls to whispered conversations. Even the king, her father, or possibly her brother, depending on the exact moment in the tangled Parthian family tree, had to be careful. Rhodagun wasn't just popular, she was respected in a way few men at court could compete with. She wasn't adored for her beauty or her bloodline, but for her leadership, for her command. She had turned her vow into a policy, her filth into folklore, and yet the silence she kept was as deliberate as any military move. She didn't tell others what she planned next, because, perhaps, even she didn't know. For the first time in years, she wasn't fighting. She wasn't commanding troops or outsmarting rebels. She was still, and that stillness made many nervous. What does a woman who conquered without a crown do next? One theory among historians is that Rhodagun used this silence to her advantage. Her presence alone, her every quiet nod or glance, forced decisions. Officials hesitated to propose bad policies for fear she'd frown. Generals delayed campaigns, hoping she might give her opinion. Her silence wasn't passive, it was a tool. She had discovered that not speaking could be more powerful than speaking. And so she remained, a living legend walking the palace corridors, her freshly washed hair braided not just in gold thread, but in memory. Her very existence challenged the rules. She had proven that Parthian might wasn't just for men. It could ride into battle with tangled hair and return with cities at its feet. And all she had to do now was wait. Because sometimes the greatest move is no move at all. As the years passed, Rodogun's name slowly faded from the official records. Parthian writers, more eager to praise kings and dynasties than unruly warrior princesses, began to downplay her campaign. The silence she once used as a weapon now became the excuse to erase her. No grand tomb was built in her name. No epic poem commissioned by the state showed her face on golden scrolls. But that's the thing about a true legend. It doesn't need permission to survive. In the outposts where her army had marched, in the villages she spared, her name remained a whispered spell. Mothers told stories of her to their daughters, not as a fairy tale, but as a warning to any man who underestimated a woman with a mission. Soldiers recited her tactics as if they were sacred texts, and the rebels, well, even decades later, they still spoke of her as if she might ride again from the dust, with hair flying like war banners. There's something deeply unsettling about someone who breaks every rule of their time and still wins. Rodogun wasn't content to be a decoration in a court. She didn't play the flute, paint birds, or practice the fine art of being quietly ignored. She burned through her time like a comet, and then vanished just as quickly. Historians have debated what happened to her. Some believe she retired from public life, choosing peace over politics. Others think she remained an advisor in the shadows, shaping Parthian strategy from behind the scenes. A few romantics claim she rode out one final time to settle a border dispute and disappeared into legend, never confirmed, never denied. But what's certain is this: her legacy endured where it mattered most, in the people. She may not have worn the crown, but she ruled in ways no crown ever could. She redefined what loyalty meant. She showed that a vow, even one as strange as refusing to comb your hair, could be as binding as a royal decree and far more inspiring. And though history books may offer her only a small mention, the dust of Parthia still remembers her, because you don't need a marble statue to be eternal. You just need to keep your vow and win. Centuries after her death, Rodogun's story remains a puzzle, well known in whispers, yet hard to find in writing. No towering statue shows her face, no royal tomb sings her praises in carved stone. But in the collective memory of those who admire rebellion, endurance, and principled fierceness, she is immortal, not in the way kings are remembered, but in the way forces of nature are. In a world where women were told to wait behind curtains, while men spilled blood in their name, Rodogun tore the curtain down and marched out barefoot, with her helmet in hand. She didn't ask for command, she took it, and the empire didn't collapse, it followed. More importantly, she taught her people a lesson that no law could enforce, that loyalty doesn't come from fear. It comes from seeing your leader suffer beside you, from watching them choose discipline over comfort, from watching them keep a promise longer than anyone thought possible. She wasn't perfect. No legend is, but her story lasts precisely because it wasn't polished or clean. It was tangled, muddy, and honest, like her hair on that final day of victory. In that filth was dignity. In that vow was a vision of leadership stronger than any title. When her soldiers looked at her, they didn't see a princess. They saw someone who believed in the fight more than her own vanity. And that's the part history couldn't quite erase. Even now, long after Parthia has crumbled and its cities have turned to sand, her name returns in moments of resistance. Artists revive her, writers search for her footprints, a vow not to wash until victory. It sounds absurd to some, but to those who have had to claw their way through injustice, it makes perfect sense. Rodagun was never about glamour, she was about grit, and in the end, it was the dust that crowned her, not gold. Dust, the same substance emperors try to escape in death, yet the very thing she wore like a badge of honor. She was forgotten by kings, ignored by historians, but remembered by the dust. And that's where legends truly live, not in stone, but in soil. Before empires clashed and blood soaked the sand, before kings trembled at her name, Tamiris was simply a daughter of the wind, born on the raw, open steppe. The land she came from was not covered in marble or echoing with philosophy. It was brutal, free, and endlessly huge. This was the world of the Massagetes, fierce nomadic horse archers, who rode like spirits of the plains. Their lives were shaped by survival, honor, and war. We know little of Tamiris's childhood, but we can imagine its rhythm. She would have learned to ride before she could run, and to shoot a bow before she could speak in full sentences. Among the Massagetes girls were not locked in tents or hidden by veils. They trained beside the boys, rode with the warriors, and grew up with iron in their blood. To lead, one had to bleed, and even as a young woman, she bled for her people. Her tribe worshipped the sun and sky, lived off their herds, and buried their dead with weapons, ready for battle in the afterlife. They had no cities, no golden temples, but they had pride. And when enemies approached, they met them not with prayers, but with arrows. Tamiris likely came to power after the death of her husband, who may have ruled the tribe before her. But what's certain is that when the moment came, she didn't just inherit leadership, she seized it. In a time when most women were considered property, Tamiris commanded an army. She negotiated with kings, she dared to speak as an equal, and if they didn't listen, she made them. She was more than a queen. She was a Shabanu, the steppe's checkmate, a war chief in bronze and leather, who would soon face the greatest empire on earth. But power, especially for a woman, never comes without consequences. As Tamiris began to strengthen her rule, whispers grew louder across the mountains. To the south, a king was watching. His name was Cyrus the Great, and he wanted more. The stage was set, the steppe wind howled, and Tamiris, daughter of warriors, would soon ride into legend. While Tamiris ruled over the open steppes, far to the south, a different kind of power was rising, structured, imperial, and relentless. Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid Empire, had already conquered Lydia in the west and Babylon in the south. His banners flew over deserts, mountains, and cities where languages changed every few days' ride. But Cyrus wasn't done. He was a builder of empires, and every builder eventually looks at the horizon. To Cyrus, the Massagetes were a threat wrapped in an opportunity. They weren't rich in gold or cities, but they controlled the northeastern frontier, and that meant access to key lands, resources, and trade routes. More importantly, the Massagetes had something no empire could afford to ignore: pride. And pride, in Cyrus's eyes, could be bent or broken. But Cyrus also knew that brute force wasn't always the best first move. He had a reputation for being clever, for using diplomacy and strategic tricks. So he tried a different approach, one that kings before him had used to get rid of threats without a single drop of blood. He proposed marriage. According to ancient sources, notably Herodotus, Cyrus sent messengers to Tamiris, offering an alliance through marriage. On paper, it was a royal match, the great king of Persia and the warrior queen of the Massagetes. But Tamiris wasn't naive. She saw the proposal for what it was, not an offer of love or partnership, but a calculated attempt to take over her people without a fight. She declined, and that rejection did not sit well in the halls of Persepolis. With the diplomatic games over, Cyrus shifted to his favorite language, war. He ordered his army to cross the Araxes River, the natural barrier that separated Persia from the land of the Massagetes. He was going to take what Tamiris refused to give, but Tamiris was already preparing. She knew the land. She knew how her people fought on horseback, fast and furious. And most of all, she knew Cyrus wasn't just coming for land. He was coming to crush a woman who dared to say no. The world's most powerful king had declared war, but he had no idea what kind of fury he had just awakened on the steppe. Taught Cyrus the Great, a master strategist and experienced conqueror, believed he could outsmart Tamiris. He had faced kings, crushed cities, and conquered nations. To him, the Massagetes were little more than wild nomads with fast horses and no cities to defend. He didn't realize he was stepping into the path of someone just as cunning and far more furious. Tamiris had warned him. After rejecting his marriage offer, she sent a clear message: cross the Araxes River, and you will regret it. But Cyrus crossed anyway, building a bridge of boats to carry his army into Massagetes land. Instead of attacking immediately, Tamiris pulled her forces back, luring Cyrus deeper into unfamiliar territory. The Persians found an abandoned camp, well stocked with food and, more importantly, Weena luxury the nomadic Massagetes rarely had. It was a baited trap, and Cyrus took it, perhaps thinking the enemy had panicked and run. Inside the camp, he left a part of his army under the command of General Harpagus, a trusted officer. As the Massagetes returned under the cover of night, they attacked the drunk and unsuspecting Persians with deadly precision. The battle was brutal and swift. Among the dead was Spargapises, Tamiris' son, and a Massagete commander. Accounts differ on what happened next. Some say Spargapises was taken alive and, realizing his capture, begged for death and took his own life. Others claim he was killed in the fighting. But all agree that when the news reached Tamiris, something inside her shattered and then turned to steel. Her grief was like a volcano, but her rage that became legendary. She sent another message to Cyrus. This one wasn't a warning, it was a vow. You may be a glutton for blood, she said, but I swear I will give you your fill. She promised to make the ground run red with Persian blood, and her vengeance would not be quiet. Cyrus had taken her son, he had invaded her land. Now, he would meet not the queen of the Massagetes, but the mother of a slain warrior, and the last face he would ever see. The next battle would not be a skirmish, it would be an execution. The sun rose over the plains like a blade, sharp and blinding. Tamiris stood at the head of her army, no longer just a queen, but a storm given form. Her warriors, hardened by the nomadic life, painted their faces with ash and rage. This wasn't about politics anymore. This was about blood. Cyrus, for all his might, had underestimated the Massagetes. He assumed they would fight like the tribes he had conquered before. Chaotic, uncoordinated, easy to crush. But Tamiris had spent her life among warriors. She understood how to strike, not blindly, but with precision. She gathered her forces for a full-scale attack on the Persian invaders, and this time, she wasn't holding back. The location of the final battle is lost to history, swallowed by the vastness of the steppe. But what's clear is that Tamiris launched a ferocious counterattack. Her cavalry swept across the plains like a tide of knives. They fired arrows from horseback, closed in with axes, and fought like people with nothing left to lose. The Persians, battle-hardened, disciplined, and experienced, weren't expecting this level of organized fury. Tamiris didn't just lead her troops, she fought beside them. Her presence on the battlefield ignited her warriors like wildfire. Every strike was driven by vengeance. Every charge was an answer to her son's death. Cyrus tried to hold the line, but it shattered. The Persians were defeated. Many died where they stood. Others fled into the endless grasslands, only to be hunted down. And Cyrus the Great, the man who had conquered Babylon, Lydia, and nearly the known world, fell in the chaos. Whether he was killed in combat or captured and executed depends on the version told, but either way, he died on Tamiris's terms. What came next is infamous. According to Herodotus, Tamiris found Cyrus's body on the battlefield, ordered his head cut off, and then, in a final act of symbolic revenge, submerged it in a wineskin filled with human blood. "Drink your fill," she said, "of the blood you thirsted for." Was it historical fact or a poetic story? Maybe both. But it didn't matter. The message was eternal. Tamiris was not to be conquered. When the dust settled and the grass drank deep the blood of an empire, Tamiris stood victorious, a warrior queen who had done what no king or army before her could. She brought Cyrus the Great to his end. News of the defeat sent shockwaves across the ancient world. The mighty Achaemenid Empire, thought to be unstoppable, had been humiliated by a woman from the steppes. The Persians did their best to downplay the loss, but the death of their founder couldn't be ignored. Cyrus's body was eventually returned and buried with honor in the royal tomb at Pasargadae. Yet, the stain of his final defeat would linger, like a wound on the empire's legacy. For Tamiris and the Massagetæ, however, the victory was more than revenge. It was a declaration. They had defended their independence, not just with weapons, but with dignity. Tamiris had stood up to the world's most powerful ruler, and she hadn't just survived. She had triumphed, and then she vanished from history. No records survive detailing her later years, her death, or any successors she may have appointed. It's as if, after taking her vengeance, Tamiris simply rode back into the horizon and allowed the wind to carry her legend forward. In the centuries that followed, historians, poets, and writers would try to fill in the blanks, turning her into a symbol as much as a woman. To the Persians, her name was a bitter reminder. To the Greeks, she was a paradox, a barbarian who showed more nobility than many kings. And to the peoples of Central Asia, Tamiris became folklore, a ghostly queen who rides through the steppe, fierce and unbending, with a sword that remembers. Her legacy would inspire countless depictions across cultures. Medieval manuscripts portrayed her in royal armor. Renaissance paintings imagined her towering over Cyrus's corpse. In every age, she became what people needed: a mother avenger, a wild queen, a lesson in arrogance, or a symbol of feminine power. But one truth cuts through the myth: she changed history. Tamiris didn't inherit a throne. She forged it in fire and fury. And for one brief, unforgettable moment, the steppe queen proved that not all empires rise. Some fall to the hooves of warriors who ride with vengeance in their hearts. Much of what we know about Tamiris comes not from local Massagetæ records. They left no stone tablets or royal archives, but from the pen of a Greek Herodotus, often called the father of history. He wrote about her a century after her time, immortalizing Tamiris in his histories. He presented her as a warrior, queen of amazing resolve and terrifying vengeance. But Herodotus wasn't just reporting facts. He was weaving a story, one part chronicle, one part morality tale. To him and his Greek audience, Tamiris represented the ultimate takedown of imperial arrogance. Cyrus the Great, a man who had conquered half the known world, fell not to a huge army or a rival king, but to a woman who fought not for glory, but for her child. Her victory was almost mythical, and Herodotus treated it that way. He even detailed her gruesome revenge, the wineskin of blood, the severed head of Cyrus, and her damning words, "Drink your fill." But was it true? Modern historians debate this endlessly. Some argue that Herodotus exaggerated or even invented parts of the story, using Tamiris as a narrative tool to humble the Persian Empire, which, at the time of his writing, was still a looming threat over the Greek world. Others believe that while the blood wineskin episode might be symbolic, the core event, Cyrus's death at the hands of Tamiris, likely did happen. There's also the question of bias. Herodotus, for all his insight, often filtered foreign cultures through a Greek lens. He portrayed the Massagetæ as wild and free, yet noble, an exotic mirror to Greek ideals of honor and liberty. Tamiris, in that frame, wasn't just a barbarian. She was a moral counterweight to Persian ambition. Still, even if details blurred over time, Herodotus succeeded in one thing. He ensured Tamiris would not be forgotten. Because of him, she became more than a historical footnote. She entered the realm of legend, where facts soften but impact sharpens. And in that space, between myth and memory, Tamiris's story found a strange kind of immortality. In a world dominated by kings and conquerors, Herodotus left us a queen who refused to kneel and left her enemies bleeding in the sand. Though she may have slain one of the ancient world's most iconic emperors, Tamiris never ruled an empire herself. She didn't build cities of stone or write laws on golden tablets. Her people, the Massagetæ, were nomads, living not by walls but by the rhythms of the land, the sky, and the horse. This meant that Tamiris's legacy was never formalized. There were no marble busts or royal coins with her face, no archives to preserve her decrees. Instead, her story passed on as stories do on the steppe, through firelight, song, and the whispered awe of warriors. The Massagetæ were one of many powerful tribes of the Central Asian steppes. Their cousins included the Scythians, the Sak, and the Dahaeol, expert horse archers who roamed the lands between the Caspian Sea and the borders of ancient China. These tribes were feared by empires for their mobility, unpredictability, and fierceness in battle. Tamiris, as a female leader among them, was rare but not entirely unique. Steppe culture, unlike many settled civilizations, allowed women far greater freedoms. Women rode, hunted, fought, and even led. Among the Scythians, graves of female warriors buried with weapons, armor, and horse gear have been found by archaeologists, confirming that the stories of fierce steppe queens were more than just legend. Tamiris stood at the peak of that tradition. Her power didn't come from inheritance or religion. It came from respect, grit, and sheer capability. She was a unifying force among scattered clans, a political leader, and a military commander in a landscape where survival meant riding faster, shooting better, and fearing nothing. But because the Massagetæ left no monuments, Tamiris became a kind of phantom queen, her name echoing only in the writings of outsiders and in the oral traditions of the steppe. To the Persian scribes, she was a warning. To the Greeks, a marvel. And to her people, likely a memory carried in bloodlines and battle songs, a ghost who rode with them across the plains. Empires may rise and fall in stone, but the stories of the steppe live on in the wind. And Tamiris, fierce, grieving, and unbroken, became its voice. Centuries passed, and the empires that once surrounded the Massagetæ rose and crumbled. Successors built Persepolis, fought Alexander the Great, and faded into the dusty footnotes of time. But Tamiris's legend endured, not in the palaces of kings, but in the hearts of those who refused to bow. Across Central Asia, she became more than a queen. She became a symbol of female strength, of resistance, of the untamed spirit of the steppe. In many ways, Tamiris embodied a kind of defiance that went beyond geography. She was not Roman, not Greek, not Persian, and so her story belonged to no empire. That made her dangerous and inspiring. In the medieval Islamic world, writers occasionally mentioned her name, reshaped by language, but never quite forgotten. In some versions, she was praised for her justice and vengeance. In others, she was seen as a savage queen, a reminder that power in the hands of a woman could be both glorious and terrifying by the time the Renaissance rolled around. European artists rediscovered her story through the writings of Herodotus. Painters depicted her in elaborate armor, standing triumphantly over Cyrus's lifeless body. In one dramatic painting, she holds his severed head high like a trophy, blood-soaked and victorious. It was theatrical, yes, but also political. These artists were fascinated by the idea of a woman who didn't just survive in a man's world, she won. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Tamiris became a nationalist icon in regions like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. Poets and educators reclaimed her as a historical heroine, proof that the roots of Central Asian identity were fierce, proud, and deeply feminine. Her name appeared in textbooks, statues, and even military ceremonies. A woman who had once ruled on horseback with a bow in hand was now riding once more through memory and myth, through rebellion and pride. In a world that still wrestles with the idea of powerful women, Tamiris remains a challenge. She wasn't perfect, saintly, or tame. She was decisive, brutal when necessary, and compassionate only to those who deserved it. She was resistance in human form, and the blood of an empire on her hands was a crown she wore without apology. History tends to favor the builders of monuments, the writers of laws, the kings who carved their names into stone. Tamiris did none of these things. She left no empire behind, no palace to dig up, no royal seal to decode. And yet, her name still lives, not because she ruled forever, but because she refused to be erased. She stands as a contradiction to how history often remembers women, not as helpers or footnotes, but as forces of destiny. Tamiris didn't beg for recognition, she took it with blood and fire. She didn't ride behind a king, she rode against one and won. Her story is retold in classrooms from Central Asia to Europe, not simply because she killed Cyrus the Great, but because she dared to defy him. She wasn't defending an empire, she was defending freedom, freedom that rode on the backs of horses, that hunted with hawks, that slept under the stars, a freedom that could not be neatly drawn on a map. Today, her statues rise from Kazakhstan's capital cities, and her face is on coins and in textbooks. To modern Central Asians, she is a mother of nations, a link to a pre-Islamic, pre-Soviet, proudly nomadic past. She is a reminder that their identity wasn't born in submission, but in the cry of battle and the gallop of horses. In a world still divided by power, by gender, by memory, Tamiris is a beacon, not just because she killed a great king, but because she taught us something even greater, that dignity is not given, it is seized, that sometimes leadership looks like a mother grieving her son and refusing to let the killer walk away. Often wonder why some names survive while others vanish. Tamiris survived because she was unforgettable, because in a time when women were expected to disappear into the tents of men, She rose, blade in hand, fury in heart, and carved her story into the flesh of history. Empires fall, statues crumble, but legends ride. And somewhere in the whispering winds of the steppe, a queen still gallops, unbroken, undefeated, and utterly unforgettable. In ancient Egypt, beekeeping wasn't a hobby. It was a state-sponsored science with divine approval. Long before modern beehives, Egyptians had already developed an organized, mobile system for managing bees and collecting honey. By 2400 BCE, beekeeping was shown in detail on the walls of tombs in the sun-drenched cemeteries of Saqqara. It wasn't just about getting honey, it was a sacred practice connected to farming, medicine, religion, and even the afterlife. The Egyptians used horizontal clay tube hives, typically stacked in rows and laid on their sides. These were nothing like modern wooden boxes. They looked more like terracotta drainpipes, and they were carefully designed to be moved with the seasons. As the Nile's floodwaters went down and flowers bloomed along its banks, hives were moved up and down the river to follow the nectar. This method of moving hives was incredibly advanced for its time, almost like ancient GPS for bees. Beekeepers used clay or stone pipes to blow smoke into the hives, calming the bees before they collected the honey. Without protective suits, these keepers had to rely on careful timing, experience, and a good amount of courage. Honeycombs were removed gently, and the honey was collected not just for food, but for medicine, mummification, and sacred ceremonies. Honey was considered a gift from the gods, a divine substance connected to Ra, the sun god. According to Egyptian myth, bees were born from the tears of Ra as they fell to earth. This wasn't just a poetic story. It shaped how the Egyptians treated bees as messengers between the mortal world and the divine. Honey was used in temple offerings, funeral rituals, and even as a form of payment in trade. It also had a major role in medicine. Ancient papyri list honey as a key ingredient in over 500 remedies, mixed with herbs, wine, or milk to treat wounds, infections, and stomach problems. Its antibacterial properties were known, even if the science wasn't understood. Beeswax, too, was collected and used in cosmetics, embalming, and even on writing tablets. It had value beyond the hive, becoming part of daily life for scribes, priests, and healers. In Egypt, the hive wasn't just a source of sweetness, it was a symbol of balance, healing, and divine order, carefully managed under the watchful eyes of both humans and gods. While Egypt gave beekeeping structure and sacredness, ancient Mesopotamia gave it something equally vital: laws. The cradle of civilization didn't just master irrigation, writing, and city building. They also knew the value of honey and the importance of protecting its production. Though Mesopotamian beekeeping wasn't as visually celebrated as in Egyptian tombs, traces of it are found in cuneiform tablets and legal codes, suggesting a quietly sophisticated practice. References to bees and honey appear as early as the Sumerian period. In Akkadian and Babylonian texts, there are mentions of Ninkura, meaning bee gardens or apiaries. These spaces were often attached to temple grounds or royal estates, suggesting honey production was controlled by the elite. Honey and beeswax were used in religious offerings, medicine, food, and trade, and losing a hive could be a serious financial blow. The hive itself was often seen as a tiny model of perfect order, disciplined, selfless, and productive. Philosophers and mystics compared bee society to an ideal human society, cooperative, industrious, and reverent. The Stoics admired bees for their instinctive sense of duty. Early Christians would later adopt the bee as a symbol of chastity and resurrection, noting how bees create but do not lust. In the magical traditions of Mesopotamia, bees were called upon in ritual purification. In some Hittite ceremonies, a live bee was released after absorbing the impurities of the community, literally carrying sin away on its tiny wings. Honey and wax were burned in sacred fires, used in crafting protective amulets, and embedded in magical texts for blessings and healing. The bee was more than a metaphor. It was a bridge, a creature that lived in nature's hidden spaces, made golden food without killing, and stung only in defense. To ancient peoples, bees weren't just miraculous, they were mystical. To the ancient world, honey wasn't just delicious, it was divine medicine. Long before bacteria were discovered, people instinctively knew that honey could clean wounds, soothe coughs, and preserve the body. It wasn't magic, though it often felt like it. It was chemistry, centuries ahead of its formal explanation. In Egypt, honey was a cornerstone of ancient medicine. Medical papyri, like the Ebers Papyrus, circa 1550 BCE, list honey in over 500 prescriptions. It was mixed with milk, figs, garlic, and herbs to treat everything from eye infections to digestive problems. When paired with animal fat or resin, it was applied as a salve to burns and cuts. Doctors knew that wounds treated with honey healed faster and resisted infection, likely due to honey's natural acidity and hydrogen peroxide content. The Greeks followed suit. Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, prescribed honey for respiratory problems, ulcers, and fatigue. He used honey mixed with vinegar to create oxymel, a tonic used to clear phlegm and reduce fevers. Greek athletes drank honeyed water to boost stamina during Olympic training, believing it restored strength quicker than wine or water alone. In India, the Ayurvedic system held honey madhu in high regard. It was classified by taste, source, and medicinal potency. Ayurvedic texts warned against overheating honey but endorsed it as a treatment for indigestion, colds, wounds, and even poison. It was also used in religious rituals, offered to gods, and consumed during sacred fasts for both spiritual and bodily cleansing. The Romans, too, believed in the medicinal power of honey. Pliny the Elder recorded dozens of remedies involving honey in his natural history. It was a base for ointments, gargles, and laxatives, and was even used to treat the wounded after battle. Honey mixed with poppy juice was given as a sedative. Roman surgeons kept it on hand to dress wounds and reduce inflammation. Beeswax had its place in medicine too, as a base for plasters, balms, and even dental fillings. Its malleability and resistance to decay made it ideal for sealing and preserving. In short, honey in the ancient world wasn't just sweet, it was life-saving. It healed the sick, preserved the dead, and symbolized purity. It was the pharmacy of the gods, delivered by the wings of bees. Ancient beekeepers were more than farmers. They were innovators, engineers, and keen observers of nature. Across civilizations, they developed specialized tools and methods that allowed them to manage bee colonies effectively, harvest honey sustainably, and even protect themselves from the bees' defensive stings. One of the most important innovations was the design of the hive itself. The Egyptians popularized the use of horizontal, cylindrical clay hives, essentially large terracotta tubes stacked in rows. These hives were durable, portable, and mimicked the natural cavities where bees thrived. Similarly, the Greeks and Romans used terracotta and woven basket hives, some with removable lids, to allow access to honeycombs without destroying the colony. The ability to inspect and harvest without killing the bees was revolutionary, paving the way for modern, sustainable agriculture. To safely extract honey, ancient beekeepers used smoke to calm the bees. The Greeks invented clay smokers and bellows, designed to direct smoke into the hive's entrance. The smoke masked alarm pheromones released by guard bees, reducing their aggression. Romans refined this by burning fragrant herbs such as thyme or oregano, which soothed the bees and possibly imparted subtle flavors to the honey. Harvesting tools varied. Wooden or bronze knives were used to slice combs carefully. Sometimes, honeycombs were pressed to extract liquid honey, and the wax was melted and filtered for later use. Beekeepers often wore minimal protection, relying on experience and careful technique to avoid stings. Suits and gloves were millennia away. Ancient texts reveal that beekeepers also observed bee behavior meticulously. They understood swarm cycles, seasonal patterns, and the importance of moving hives to optimize nectar collection. Some cultures practiced transhumance, relocating hives to follow the bloom of flowering plants, similar to modern migratory beekeeping. Additionally, honey storage was a crucial aspect of ancient beekeeping. Egyptians used sealed ceramic jars to store honey, protecting it from moisture and spoilage. Honey's remarkable shelf life was well known, sometimes lasting for centuries when sealed within tombs. Even the relationship between humans and bees was carefully managed. Rituals were performed to appease bee spirits or gods, ensuring cooperation and avoiding misfortune. This spiritual care was as vital as the physical tools in maintaining a productive hive. In all, ancient beekeeping was a blend of craftsmanship, natural science, and reverence. The tools and techniques they developed set foundations that still influence modern APICURE. The ancient practice of beekeeping laid the groundwork for a relationship between humans and bees that continues to this day. Far from a simple agricultural activity, early beekeeping was an art and science that influenced medicine, religion, economy, and ecology across civilizations, shaping the way we understand nature and sustainability. From the Nile Valley to the hills of Anatolia, from the temples of Greece to the farms of Rome, ancient beekeepers perfected methods to protect and sustain their colonies. Their innovations in hive design, smoke use, and seasonal management allowed for sustainable honey harvests, a practice crucial for both survival and trade. The respect they showed for the bees' life cycles helped foster a model of harmony between humans and nature. Their understanding of honey as a medicine informed the early pharmacopoeias of Egypt, India, and Rome, influencing healing practices that persist in traditional medicine worldwide. Honey's antibacterial and preservative properties became the foundation for wound care and remedies, while beeswax shaped early technologies in cosmetics, art, and construction. The symbolic and spiritual meanings given to bees and honey in ancient cultures also endure. Religious rituals honoring bees and honey continue in various traditions, reflecting humanity's ongoing fascination with the hive as a metaphor for order, cooperation, and divine blessing. The idea of bees as messengers between worlds or symbols of resurrection fills art, literature, and folklore across centuries. Moreover, the ancient practice of migratory beekeeping, moving hives to follow floral blooms, is echoed in modern commercial agriculture, essential for crop pollination and global food production. The innovations of ancient beekeepers helped set the stage for today's awareness of bees as vital pollinators and the environmental challenges they face. Despite technological advances, the core relationship remains unchanged. Humans depend on bees for food, medicine, and ecosystem health, and bees, in turn, have shaped human culture, economy, and spirituality since the dawn of civilization. The The legacy of ancient beekeeping is a testament to human ingenuity, respect for nature, and the enduring power of collaboration, both within the hive and between species. It reminds us that even the smallest creatures can inspire science, faith, and survival. The most telling piece of evidence comes from the Code of Hammurabi, dating to around 1754 BCE. While most of the code is famously about issues like theft, injury, and farming, a few lines directly address bee disputes. If someone allowed their bees to swarm into another man's field and the bees caused damage, they were responsible. If honey was stolen, payment had to be made, sometimes in the form of silver or replacement jars. In a world where almost everything was counted in grain, the fact that honey needed its own legal protection speaks volumes. Mesopotamians also saw bees as more than just insects. Some texts described them as divine messengers, even linking them to Ninurta, the god of agriculture and war. Beeswax, in particular, was valued for sealing documents and creating ritual statues. It was both practical and mystical, part of both bureaucracy and magic. Though the exact design of Mesopotamian hives isn't fully preserved, scholars believe they may have used mud brick or woven basket hives, similar to early styles in the Levant. These would have been kept in shaded gardens or on rooftops, protected from the harsh summer heat. Mesopotamian beekeeping was less about worship and more about structure, regulating resources, ensuring fairness, and maintaining the economic balance of a society where even a bee sting might end in a lawsuit. Here, the hive was not just a biological wonder. It was a tiny model of order, law, and the civilizing force itself. In the rugged highlands of Anatolia, long before the Greeks took center stage, the Hittites were quietly mastering the art of beekeeping, and they weren't treating it like a backyard hobby. To the Hittites, bees were sacred agents of purity, messengers between worlds, and essential to both farming and the spiritual health of the kingdom. Unlike Egypt and Mesopotamia, where beekeeping was a mix of science and economics, the Hittites took a more ritualistic approach. In religious texts from the 14th and 13th centuries BCE, bees are mentioned not just as producers of honey, but as active participants in purification ceremonies. One famous Hittite ritual text describes a ceremony in which a bee is called upon to go and remove the evil, the impurity, and the wrath of the gods. The bee is then released, not killed, a rare show of mercy in ancient rituals that suggests a deep respect for the insect. The Hittites valued honey for its taste and its sacred use. It was used in offerings, sacrificial gifts, and anointing rituals, often combined with wine, milk, or grain. Honey wasn't just eaten, it was poured, burned, and blessed. It served as a bridge between human intention and divine acceptance. In terms of practice, evidence suggests the Hittites used clay or woven hives, likely stored in protected areas near temples or royal estates. Though the archaeological record is limited, similarities with neighboring Levantine and Syrian traditions hint at portable, tube-like hives, possibly made from straw and mud, stacked and managed much like those in Egypt. Beekeepers in the Hittite world likely operated under temple control, their work deeply connected to seasonal festivals and state rituals. Honey was not just a simple product. It was a tool of diplomacy, healing, and spiritual cleansing. The bee, small and unassuming, held symbolic weight that far exceeded its size. The Hittites also contributed a vital piece to the global understanding of bees. They recognized bee migration. Some surviving texts describe the seasonal behaviors of swarms, linking blooming patterns with honey flow, an insight that shows how closely they observed their environment. In Anatolia, the hum of the hive wasn't background noise. It was a sacred frequency, vibrating through the bones of gods and kings alike. The ancient Greeks didn't just study bees. They admired them, feared them, and modeled society on their mysterious order. To the Greeks, the hive was more than a place of honey. It was a living metaphor, a model for the ideal city-state, a symbol of divine order, and a source of endless scientific curiosity. Greek beekeepers advanced the science of apiculture with a blend of practical knowledge and philosophical thinking. Unlike earlier civilizations that used stationary clay hives, the Greeks developed movable terracotta hives with removable lids and sections. These allowed for easier access to the honeycomb without destroying the colony, an early step towards sustainable harvesting. They also mastered the art of smoke control, using ceramic bellows and clay smokers. They would puff smoke into the hive entrance, sedating the bees before honey extraction. This innovation not only reduced stings, but also preserved the hive's structure, allowing for multiple harvests per season. One of the most influential minds in Greek history, Aristotle, studied bees in extraordinary detail. In his Historia Animalium, he described hive behavior, noting that bees appeared to have distinct roles. Some gathered nectar, others defended the hive, and one whom he called the king bee seemed to lead. Although he got the gender wrong, Aristotle's observations laid the groundwork for centuries of bee research. Honey held a revered place in Greek culture. It sweetened wine, preserved fruits, and flavored cakes. It was also used as a base for medicinal salves, especially in wound care, and was seen as a divine gift. The Greeks believed that ambrosia, the food of the gods, was a mixture of honey and wine. The bee itself had mythological significance. It was associated with Artemis, goddess of wild things, and Demeter, goddess of the harvest. Priestesses of Artemis were even called Melissa, the Greek word for bees. The idea of the bee as a sacred feminine force carried deep symbolic power. For the Greeks, the hive was both a scientific marvel and a spiritual emblem, a reminder that even the smallest creatures move with purpose, discipline, and grace. In studying bees, they believed they were studying the very laws of nature, and perhaps of the gods themselves. If the Greeks studied bees with wonder, the Romans managed them with ambition. Beekeeping in the Roman Empire wasn't just a small-scale industry, it was scaled up to match the needs of a civilization that stretched across continents. From the vineyards of Gaul to the hills of Hispania, Rome turned the humble hive into an empire-wide enterprise. The Romans inherited much of their beekeeping knowledge from the Greeks and Etruscans, but they expanded it into a formalized agricultural science. Writers like Varro and Columella recorded detailed instructions for building hives, harvesting honey, and relocating colonies. Their writings describe beekeeping with a surprising modernity, including observations on swarm behavior, seasonal cycles, and pest control. Roman hives came in many forms: hollow logs, cork bark containers, clay tubes, and even woven baskets sealed with dung or mud. Flexibility was key. In colder climates, more insulation was needed. In warmer provinces, ventilation was critical. These innovations allowed Rome's beekeepers to adapt the craft across vastly different regions of the empire to calm bees. Romans used clay pots filled with smoldering herbs like thyme or oregano. The smoke soothed the hive and perhaps added a subtle flavor to the honey. Harvesting was done with iron knives, and wax was separated by melting and straining, later used in candles, writing tablets, cosmetics, and even for waterproofing ships. Honey wasn't just food, it was everywhere. It was added to wine to make mulsum, used in baking, in sauces for meat and fish, and even as an early energy source for athletes and soldiers. Roman physicians, following Hippocratic traditions, prescribed honey for sore throats, wounds, fevers, and digestive problems. Its antibacterial properties were well known and well used, but perhaps the most Roman thing about their beekeeping was organization. Large villas often had dedicated honey farms run by enslaved labor under the supervision of estate managers. Production was recorded in ledgers, and surplus honey was sold in markets or exported to distant provinces. Bees were viewed not just as insects, but as productive citizens of the Roman economy. To the Romans, a well-run hive mirrored a well-run household, ordered, obedient, and endlessly fruitful, while ancient civilizations cultivated bees for honey and wax. Many also saw the hive as a doorway to the divine. Across Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, and beyond, bees weren't just insects. They were spiritual beings, buzzing between worlds, delivering messages from gods, and offering sacred gifts like honey that bridged the natural and supernatural realms. In Egypt, bees were directly tied to divine creation, as mentioned earlier. Mythology claimed that Ra, the sun god, shed tears that turned into bees upon touching the earth. Honey was used in temple offerings to please deities and to accompany the dead into the afterlife. The bee also became a royal symbol. Pharaohs of Lower Egypt bore the title he of the sedge and the bee, connecting their authority to the cosmic harmony of the hive. In Greece, the bee held powerful feminine symbolism. The priestesses of Demeter and Artemis, goddesses of fertility and wilderness, were called Melissae, or bees. These women were considered channels between the divine and mortal realms. The Oracle of Delphi, one of the most important religious centers in the ancient world, was believed by some to have originally been presided over by bee priestesses. Even the famed Pythia, the Delphic prophetess, was sometimes called the Delphic bee.